Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you so much for joining us today at another great video meetup. Today, we're here to talk all about the best practices for developing a cloud strategy. Well, as we all know, when it comes to meeting business requests, the IT pros like you guys have to be on the ball and make sure that you are able to deal with them in a timely manner, or else the customers tend to start taking things into their own hands, and we all know how well that goes. So if you want to start incorporating things like software as a and infrastructure as a service, you better have that good strategy in place. Otherwise, that could spell disaster for you later on. So in order to help you guys out, we've brought with us an awesome panel of experts, including a couple cloud experts from Cisco and Datalink, as well as an IT pro from the Spiceworks community. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start things off with a round of introductions so y'all can meet our panel of experts. Coming to us first, representing the Spiceworks community, everyone please welcome Carl Siebold. Carl, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for joining the panel today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm the Director of IT of Compass Healthcare in Michigan. It's a conglomeration of 6 different doctors' offices that joined together about 2 years ago to build a new cancer center. And our big challenge has been consolidating, making things more efficient, and making everything work well between the offices.
All right, very cool. And Carl, I see the Michigan State emblem on your polo. Are you calling us from Michigan by chance?
I am, right in East Lansing.
Very cool. Go green, go white. Thank you so much for joining us. And Carl, what is your username within the community?
It's C. Siebold, first initial, last name.
All right, keeping it short and simple. Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next panelist comes to us representing Cisco. So everyone please give a warm welcome to Matt Reefer. Matt, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks.
Matt, can you tell us a little about yourself and your role within Cisco?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a software sales specialist at Cisco. I represent our commercial central business, so basically the smallest customers up to small enterprise across basically the 13 states in the middle of the U.S. When we say software specialist at Cisco, it's a new role. It's only been around about a year, but ultimately it's covering some of our software buying programs like enterprise license agreements, et cetera, as well as Cisco One has been my major focus, which is, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but it's ultimately a way that we're creating solution-oriented bundles around a lot of the software that runs on our data center and network here.
All right, very cool. Thanks so much for joining us, Matt. And where are you calling us from today?
Chicago suburbs.
Chicago suburbs. You guys keeping warm?
We're getting there. Looking forward to a warm weekend.
It's supposed to be early spring. We'll see. Thanks so much for joining us. And last but certainly not least, representing Datalink is Kent Christensen. Kent, welcome to the panel. Can you tell us a little about yourself and Datalink?
Morning, Justin, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kent Christensen. I'm the practice director for our virtual data center and cloud strategy at Datalink. I'm calling from beautiful Minneapolis, and it is above freezing, so that's good for us in February. But Datalink is an IT transformation company, which means, as we start talking about cloud, we don't just help people with data center strategy, but a broader strategy around cloud to define their cloud strategy, build out their infrastructure, whether that's private, public, et cetera, architect that, build the services around it takes to get that, and even operationalize that.
All right, very cool. And Ken, go ahead.
All right. We have a presence across the U.S., so we're at all the offices they're calling from, plus most NFL cities.
Okay. And then, can you tell us a bit about the partnership between Datalink and Cisco?
Yeah, we've been a very strategic partner with Cisco for probably about 6 years. So we're kind of the new kids on the block. But as Cisco has started to build out, really their private cloud strategy, their UCS strategy, obviously strong network, it's become very important to us, and we've become, I think, very relevant, especially on these types of topics, and Cisco has become our largest partner and growing very fast.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining the panel today, Kent. Before we go any further, I did want to cover a few housekeeping items. On your console, you should see all of our faces, but there are also a couple of other widgets that you guys might be interested in. On the bottom of your console, there is a brown widget that does allow you to chat with the other attendees today. I see some of you guys have already discovered that, so please say hi to everyone else as well as the panel. But most importantly, there is a red Q&A widget. If you guys have questions for the panel today, we're going to be taking all of your questions live. So make sure to please get those in. And lastly, there is a green resource widget where both Cisco and Datalink have provided a lot of great links to some supporting content for our discussion today. Plus, as an added bonus, if this wasn't enough, for those of you who are in attendance today, thank you so much for joining us. As a special thank you, one of you guys will be winning a Nintendo Wii U today. So good luck to everybody, and stick around till after the show, and that's where we'll be announcing our winners. And make sure to get those questions in. Well, so Carl, let's go ahead and start off with you, representing the IT pro community. Particularly someone who does work in an industry where regulations do kind of come into play. What's been your cloud strategy in cloud experience so far, and why is it important to you?
Working in healthcare, we are a very regulated industry. We've got HIPAA, PCI to an extent, and a number of other requirements from the CMS. So working within it is really kind of tough. Our strategy so far has been prepping to go to the cloud, and for that means that I've been working a lot with virtualization. My background is both as a VMware ESXi expert and a Hyper-V expert. I've got certifications in both. And I've been prepping all of my infrastructure to be ready to go to the cloud when the policies and procedures needed are ready for it.
Okay, so well, tell us about this. Why look to the cloud? The kind of traditional, in-house infrastructure seems to have worked all this time. What do you feel like looking to hosted solutions really allows you to be able to do?
I've got 220 or so users that use 5 different EMRs in 7 different offices, and maintaining that infrastructure myself and with the help of one other is quite a challenge. The cloud for me offers me a little bit of backup. It offers me the ability to give some of that work to another vendor to take care of. I don't have to worry about hard drives, RAID arrays, or anything like that. It's it's me trying to be the most efficient, lazy IT director ever.
I don't know what I'd call it lazy. I think you've probably got plenty of other stuff to do with your time. So can you tell us a little bit, what specifically have you been looking at? Is it just kind of software as a service solutions, or are you actually looking to move some of your virtual workloads to an IaaS provider?
Any and all. I've been taking a number of meetings with a bunch of EMR vendors, which is the biggest piece of the puzzle for doctors' offices, is the medical records software as well as the practice management software. And most of them do have some sort of cloud offering now. There's quite a few that offer a hybrid strategy where you can start with your own infrastructure and a link to the outside world. And in fact, there's some regulations within CMS that say that you have to have a patient portal now, which means that your data does have to be somewhat linked to the rest of the internet so that the patient can log in and see it.
Okay. Now, working for a healthcare, working inside the healthcare industry, obviously HIPAA has a big, impact on what you are and aren't able to do. So for you, when it comes to both balancing HIPAA requirements as well as wanting to leverage a lot of the benefits of some of these cloud-based solutions, what do you feel are kind of your must-haves as far as the cloud providers?
Well, you've hit most of it. The HIPAA and security aspects are the biggest thing. Patient health information is my number one task, is to keep it secure, only allow the vendors that absolutely need to see it. And those vendors are like the EMR provider, the CT scan provider, and along with that is the audit trails. I have to be able to verify that this particular doctor did look at this record or this nurse did look at this record. And then along with the security stuff, I need speed and efficiency. Everyone hates waiting at the doctor's office. We want to make sure that our doctors are running in a timely fashion, seeing all the patients when they're supposed to be seen, and making sure that the patient is getting the best care possible. You're a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, Cam, is Carl's experience, fairly similar to the customers that you guys work with? What are kind of the primary benefits that they're looking to be able to accomplish? And can you tell us about some of the challenges that go along with that?
Sure. What Carl is doing is he's doing a fabulous job of starting to lay out a few things that not everybody is become clear at. So as I'm listening to Carl, he's saying, well, why do I want to go to the cloud? Many organizations don't clearly understand that. What I'm hearing Carl say is efficiency. I want to consolidate applications. I want to get work off my plate. I want efficiency. Others think it's just going to be cheaper. So that's, understand that. If I want to do this because I think somebody can run an application more efficiently or more cost effectively to me. And others do it for agility. If I need to get my app to market more quickly, then cloud might be the way to do that. So, we help organizations like Carl's go through and rationalize what are we trying to accomplish here. It's usually one of those three things. It's either efficiency, cost, or agility, which is a business outcome or some sort of a patient outcome or whatever. Then Carl started looking at policy, right? So everything doesn't belong in the cloud, and cloud's a big fuzzy word. I think, Carl, you're starting to allude to EMRs, and maybe there's an application that runs in the cloud, which would be maybe a software as a service, and that's really a very large part of cloud. But I imagine everybody listening to this today has some of that in their organization. So, there's one piece, if there's an app for that or a SaaS application. But, he virtualized his private infrastructure, so that could becoming a private cloud, and he could deliver efficiencies and things like that on a private infrastructure. I think you might have mentioned Hyper-V and VMware, et cetera. And then there's public cloud. There's all these resources out there, and can I run that more efficiently? So what we do is help organizations like Carl's and others when they say, I'm trying to evolve a cloud strategy, help them understand, what's the business outcome, which is important. Why am I doing this, and what's the benefit of doing this? Mm-hmm. What are the options given the investments I've made, given the business I'm in? And then, I think I might have mentioned this, but Carl started talking about policy. We have regulation requirements on our data and things like that, and so that becomes part of a cloud policy, and that helps you rationalize where things will go. So, okay. Absolutely. A long-winded answer of yes.
That's okay. Well, can you tell us a bit more? We've been talking a lot of times when people do talk about the cloud, they do talk about IaaS and SaaS, but you bring up private clouds, you also bring up hybrid solutions. Can you tell us exactly what does that actually mean? What does that look like, both from a hardware perspective, as well as the process to kind of start looking at that?
So, from a high level, we believe that Carl and other organizations like his won't use one cloud, that there are going to be multiple types of cloud that are going to meet the needs. And so we started talking about, what types of cloud would that be? So, if they did a lot of development, they might find a platform that runs their applications or helps them build applications. We talked a little bit about SaaS, so Salesforce, Workday, EMR applications. Those are becoming more and more readily available via the cloud from the provider that runs it in their data center and then provides it to Carl, over the cloud or over the internet. Private cloud, a lot of organizations have data in a data center today. They're trying to evolve or transform how those are architected to be more efficient, and virtualization is a key tenet of that. And then, public cloud, so the Amazons and the Azures and all the other public clouds, even healthcare community clouds, where we might have a cloud that all healthcare providers feed into, and it meets these compliance, and it might be applicable to organizations such as Carl's. All of that in the aggregate becomes, a broad cloud strategy, and our view is that organizations like Carl and people like Carl within the organization will want to help broker out where those applications run. So as user groups and healthcare providers and things like that articulate their needs, then we need, somebody with a broad view to say, this makes sense, but due to regulation and cost, this should run on our private. Oh, there's a community cloud for that. We should get you hooked up with that, but I can take into account the due diligence required to do that. That leads to a picture, which, seems fuzzy, but, we really want to funnel the organization's requirements through cloud, through some sort of a lens, so that Carl and his team can help broker out those applications. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that, in aggregate becomes a hybrid cloud strategy. It's not one cloud, it's a hybrid strategy.
Sure. Do you guys also do a lot of work in sort of integrating, custom integration work around getting a lot of these either IaaS or SaaS providers to communicate with either in-house or other cloud applications?
Sure. So, understanding your application is key.
Mhm.
So, understanding your requirements, what you're trying to accomplish, what your policies are, et cetera. Understanding internally how your applications work with other applications, et cetera, so you can, outsource things. And then I guess, to a certain extent, if I have a desired state to say I want to run in this cloud, how will I get what I have today out there, and if needed back at some point? So we'll help with the migration and the strategy and when needed, some of the architecture as well.
Okay. Um, I wanted to take we've already got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, so wanted to take a couple of them so far. This question comes from Brian9095, and I think this is a question for both Carl and Kent, and maybe we'll start with Carl first, and Kent can kind of add what he's seen as well. But he's asking, was your ownership and C-level executives fearful of the cloud, and if so, how did you finally convince them? So Carl, can you kind of speak from your experience first?
Yeah, the board of directors for Compass are extremely afraid of the cloud. They look at the cloud as this intermingling of a whole bunch of data centers and hard drives, and they're afraid that our data is going to be intermingled with others. And part of my job in taking the meetings for the MRs that offer cloud solutions is getting rid of those fears and explaining that a lot of the time these providers, even though they may not fit all the policy requirements I have, they are meeting the requirements that the business owners have, meaning that they are really private clouds. It is completely isolated storage, isolated operating systems, isolated virtual machines, and making sure that they understand that it is safe.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, what can you tell us with the customers you work with? Have you, dealt with leadership that had
Yep.
concerns about the safety, and what do you typically, how do you typically recommend with those?
I agree, and there is no one example, right? There's so many examples, and people are across the board. But as Carl's articulating, in healthcare, we're very fearful because we have a lot of compliance issues, and therefore by default, we'll start to put up a defense. And so that makes sense in healthcare organizations. Organizations like Carl's need to help them understand what cloud is, what it isn't, what we're going to do with it, and apply it to the organization's policies. And theirs are, maybe more on the side of fear. Other organizations are more aggressive, where the C-levels got off an airplane and said, everybody's going to the cloud, we're going to the cloud. We make potato chips. Why are we working on all this infrastructure? Why do I have a data center? I'm just going to throw everything out in the cloud. And they're probably overly aggressive and haven't thought about those things that Carl's organization is more thoughtful about. So it runs the gamut, depending on industry, depending on how aggressive the team is, what's the board of directors thinking. So it's important to understand that, and I would say in general, Carl has talked about, I want to use cloud as an efficiency play. It's going to save us money. It's going to make us more efficient. We're going to consolidate things like that. Whereas some of the other more aggressive are looking at IT as a cost center and saying, we're going to the cloud because I believe they can do it better. And it's really important for IT organizations to understand that somebody's got these initiatives, whether it's fear or aggression, and help communicate. Because if they don't, then we'll just assume that IT doesn't understand it and may not even be consulted.
All right. I have another question from Tyler, who's asking about kind of managing costs around it and understanding the total cost of ownership. And he asks, is the cloud ultimately cheaper in the long run, considering the subscription model? Considering when you buy some software rather than continuing paying for a subscription, what's been your experience in this area? Kent, maybe you can kind of start off on kind of talking about what you do.
Well, the answer is it depends. So there are plenty of places where cloud is incredibly efficient. SaaS is an example. If I owned an application and I wanted to, and maybe it's an application that applies to Carl's organization, I had a choice to sell that software to Carl, have him find an infrastructure, have him provision it. I'll try to help him support it, etc., and he would run it on his private infrastructure or cloud. I could change, if it was in my best interest, the licensing and make it more financially feasible for Carl to buy it running in my data center. Maybe it's easier for me to support, etc. So it really depends from a software point of view how they want to license it. It's probably more efficient if there's an app for that to operate it and consume it if you're comfortable with that. In the world of public cloud, let's just go generic, there's high-level rules of thumb. Lots of people go to public cloud and don't think about the fact that when it runs all the time and it uses data, that becomes very expensive over time. So, generally speaking, you would say if it's a strategic application, it's important to you. If it's running 365 days a year, it's probably going to cost significantly more to run in the cloud than it would be to operate it yourself. Whereas if you're doing innovation or running a test or doing, some sort of QA or whatever, that might be something that runs in a short duration and needs a bunch of resources for a small time. And that would be, much more efficient in public cloud than private. So it really depends. And again, that's one of the things we help organizations do. If they say we're going to the cloud, we say, great, let's help you. And at the end of the day, many organizations are going to have multiple types of cloud they leverage for cost and compliance and all those other reasons.
Mm-hmm. And Carl, what about your experience? When you looked at the costs of migrating to cloud-based applications, how did you kind of manage the long-term TCO of it, or what was your reasoning behind it?
When I took this position, I didn't expect to be doing this much math. The 5-year hardware refresh is a real big cost for a lot of these software programs that we have to run at all of our offices. So I have to take that into account and compare it to the cost of the year-to-year maintenance for the software. And a lot of the EMR providers, they have different business models where they charge by how many providers are in the office, how many users are in the office, and when they go to the cloud, it can change completely. There's one that I just recently ran into where they actually tie what they bill to our billables. So they take a percentage of everything that we pull in through insurance billing, just because we're using their infrastructure for everything. And that was a big turnoff for our business owners, is they didn't want to tie our profitability to their profitability, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was another point in that question, which was how do you understand TCO and how do you compare it? So as Carl's pointing out, sometimes we don't know what our cost is today, so how do you compare that with something else? And then it's a challenge, quite frankly, when you say, okay, we want hybrid cloud, who wouldn't, right? How do you do that? How do you understand what's right? And those cost models compare, whether it's, historically or what will this cost in the future, are just starting to evolve. So when somebody says I want a hybrid cloud, there's different ways to get there. Carl had mentioned he uses Hyper-V, and Microsoft might say, here's our cloud strategy, because I don't think there's anybody who doesn't walk into an organization that's selling something and say they don't have a cloud strategy. Obviously, VMware's got a cloud strategy because in a lot of people, their data center, they have VMware as their hypervisor. And it makes sense to point out that Cisco's got a cloud strategy because in most organizations, they're a network provider, and they've built that on that. And, just to kind of hand it over to Matt for a little bit, what Cisco One has done is taking a suite of tools required to build hybrid cloud and put them into something called Cisco One Enterprise Cloud. And that includes, the things you would need. How do I orchestrate and automate my infrastructure to build private cloud? How does it communicate to public clouds? And then how do I manage and compare those costs? And so all of that becomes, this enterprise cloud suite, and then how do I give that out to users? What do they look at? What's their portal? How do they consume it? All of that is within a suite of software that organizations like Carl's could use to understand and automate the provisioning of infrastructure, leverage hybrid cloud services, public cloud services, and run financials of it's costing me this to run it here. I see that X cloud provider has these type of infrastructure. is that more expensive or less expensive, and be able to compare that.
Matt, would you care to add anything to what Ken was mentioning? Can you
that
tell us
was
that
was an excellent plug for Cisco One. But yeah, ultimately, it really is all about streamlining this process and reducing complexity. There's enough stuff that's on Carl's plate today, for example, in terms of all of this automation and integration and everything, and managing a list of 1,000 different SKUs that you're trying to pick from to get it from Cisco, is not something that's really a good use of your time. So we've created Cisco One to basically create bundles of the most commonly used features, whether it's in the data center from an enterprise cloud suite perspective, or whether it's common features on a switch, a router, a wireless controller, and boil them all up into a single SKU. Think of something like, from my past, Microsoft Office. You don't buy Word, PowerPoint, Excel separately. You buy them all together. Even though you might not use one of them, you still get it, and you have it at the ready. So that's really what we're all about with Cisco One, whether it's in the data center from this perspective, or whether it's going into traditional network infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great example in cost, because you give the example of Microsoft Office, and they decided to make it a bundle, and obviously buying each of the 5 pieces would have cost more than buying the bundle. And then they gave you the other option of saying, do you want to buy it over the cloud, as Office 365, or do you want to buy the software and install it yourself? So, those are some of the variables that go into it. But, as Matt's pointing out, what Cisco's done is bundled it, make it easy to consume, a lot less expensive, but also, again, in the case of cloud, saying, here are all the components we think you need to build, that hybrid cloud brokerage that your organization can leverage.
And Carl, when we were talking about this earlier, you had mentioned that you had some kind of struggles around, the purchasing process that Cisco One may have been able to help you out with. Can you kind of talk about that?
Right. When I took over this position and started combining all the offices together, I was stuck with a pretty hard job. Each of the offices had a different culture. Some of them had very little IT support. One of them still is fighting to not use a domain for their logins. They still have security around their practice management, but they don't use their Active Directory server to log into their local machines. They only use it for a terminal server. So coming from all of those various different levels, I look at like the hardware that they provide me for their routing and switching, and there is just too many options. And my experience from my previous years doing SMB networking was Cisco. So Cisco is what I decided on to standardize all of my networks, and it was kind of hard to pick the right hardware to set up all the LAN-to-LAN VPNs, all the MPLS that I needed to go to the hospitals, for instance. And if I would have had a better option a couple of years ago that could have maybe guided me towards a consolidated solution, it would have been a lot easier, because I ended up picking a handful of ASAs to work as my firewalls, and I picked the switch based on the local need. Do I need PoE? Do I need gig? If I had a holistic view of it 2 years ago, I would have probably picked something a bit different. And it sounds like the Cisco One would have been a good thing had it been around a couple of years ago.
All right, well, great. Let's go ahead and take a couple more questions. We've got a couple from Lori, and it looks like Carl, you've started to answer it, but she's asking, are there minimums for infrastructure to ensure acceptable performance? I think there's, I'm not sure if that's enough information for you guys, but maybe Carl, would you like to start off by what you were starting with?
Yeah, one of my offices, actually 2 offices that share an EMR, has a ridiculously high level of need for the SQL Server and the front-end server to run the VMware application. 128 gigs, 2 Xeon, 8 core, and we're at about 4 terabytes of live data that needs to be available very, very quickly. So when I look at cloud offerings, I have to take into account that we're migrating 7 years worth of patient data up to the cloud, and we need to have the same and hopefully better performance for when that patient comes in and the doctor has to pull up the chart and review it before meeting with the patient.
Yeah, the answer to Lori's question is yes. There is a minimal for performance, and as Carl points out, what is the requirement? And one of the things that we see with database, that may be one of the things that stays on the private cloud because A, it needs a lot of performance. You talk about databases like SQL. I might want to have, Flash, which is extremely fast, and be able to guarantee those service levels. And many times when you're using a lot of data like that, and when you're demanding performance, cloud becomes very expensive very quickly. So that's an example of something you might put in your private cloud for cost reasons and performance reasons. But that's what's important, is to understand what are the requirements of the different components of this application and where should it best run.
All right. Let's take another question from Lori, and she's asking, do you guys have, or specifically for Carl, but maybe again you can chime in. She asked, are there any concerns about data ownership in a public cloud? Should you decide to bring it back into your data center? What would you consider determining factors to bringing back from the cloud into your data center?
That's actually one of the big questions I have when I've met with these EMR providers is the translation of the data. All of them store their data in a different table format in SQL or whatever database that they end up using, and the important thing is that we maintain that data for at least 7 years, or maintain our access to it due to HIPAA requirements. So one of our offices has switched twice in the last 4 years between EMR providers, and it's been very cumbersome. We either have to pay a third party huge amounts of money to translate the data, or we keep paying support for the software and run in parallel so that we can look up the old records and then put the new information in the new system. So when I've met with these EMR providers, I have been discussing how easy is it to get the data out if we so choose to leave you. And it turns into quite a, well, we can get it to you in HL7 format, which is a standard interchange format for healthcare. But that doesn't really answer the question because there's so much other stuff that goes along with it. There's imaging, there's Word documents, PDFs, everything that comes in from, say, the referring doctors through fax or the health exchange servers that we connect up to so that our doctors can see records from, say, the hospital that they work at. So it's a big thing, is the interoperability of the data. And if I did go to the cloud, to get specifically to your question, I would have to be guaranteed that I could either have the exact database, I want the MDB file with the log file, or they need to translate into something that I can import completely into my private cloud or my own SQL server.
And Ken, what about you? Go ahead.
So that's a huge, so there's ownership and translation, and just generally speaking, that's a huge issue in healthcare. Even if you go into a large hospital system, or maybe I think you're in a cancer center, Carl, you might have different areas where, MRIs are in one format and something else is in another format, and, you go in as Justin and say, I just want all my information in one place, and there's a translation issue within the hospital, and then you multiply that if you put out the cloud, and then ownership is, again, another policy you have to consider.
Yeah, and the imaging is a big thing. I had to find a solution that worked for all of our divisions. We have MRI, CT, X-ray, C-arm, a handful of imaging formats that are coming in, and we needed to have one solution so that all the doctors within our organization could view and review those images live. So it's another example of our own private cloud. I've got one server that basically does all that imaging, and it also does something really neat for when patients come to the cancer center, because it allows our dosimetry office to do all of the scoping for the nuclear treatment. It's basically photoshopping all of the organs to highlight them and to set up the equations to figure out how much radiation and what angle to treat that patient.
All right, great. I've got.
That's a big issue in healthcare, and there's maybe a cloud idea for Carl or somebody else that if the healthcare organization can help their different systems communicate in a common format and provide it as a SaaS service, there's a business idea for somebody.
What is it? Step one, create that service. Step two, profit. We got another question from Brian who's asking, and I think this is a really good one. So how do you deal with security against malware, et cetera, as it relates to IaaS and SaaS?
Great question, because security is top of mind for everybody today. So, obviously you're going to have processes against malware for anything in your data center, and methods for keeping it out and detecting it once it gets in and things like that. So that could be an entire Spiceworks conversation, is what do I do from a security perspective, because it's such top of mind, and we've seen the retailers get hacked and see the ramifications, and the ramifications are huge in healthcare. If a patient data just even gets to any unknown spot. So that's a big issue. One of the things that I think the benefits of the way Cisco is approaching cloud, which isn't, I'll just throw it out in that cloud and hope I can see it and hope I can manage it, and then someday hope I can get it back, is what they're doing with this intercloud concept is extending your secure network with all of your policies from your data center out into the cloud provider of choice. And so that's kind of the magic of it, is there's a methodology of which you can have something running on a quote public cloud of some sort, but it appears as though it's on your network, and logically it is on your network, and it is following within the same security envelope that you've defined for your private cloud.
Carl, was malware and outside infiltration something that you had looked into or were concerned about?
Yes. In fact, we are a
question
of Lockheed. We had a user receive an invoice email in Word document format, and due to that office's EMR requirements, they need to have macros enabled in Microsoft Word to be able to work within the EMR and to create the documents that go out to the other physicians. So this particular user had just been given the position of ordering some of the medical equipment necessary, and she got an email that said invoice. So she just opened it up. She ended up encrypting close to 40,000 files on 2 different servers. Thankfully, I had shadow copy and other backups available, so I was able to get things back in probably about an hour and a half. But we got hit, and we have good antivirus that we run on all of our end stations, and we have had a conversation with them about this because they said that they would have prevented Lockheed specifically. And if we think about going to more of a public cloud, it becomes a little bit of a bigger question for me, because how much access do I actually get? Do I get to log in and look at the shadow copies and do recovery myself, or do I have to rely on a vendor to go in and do that recovery? It becomes a bit more of a concern, because I personally, I want to be responsible for my data, and I like being able to tell my business owners, hey, I was able to recover that stuff within hours. If we get hit again, we've got a procedure in place where we lock down those folders where nothing can be changed until we get things fixed. And my second set of hands, he goes out and he finds the offending machine and makes sure it gets cleaned up and off the network until it is.
All right. And we've got one last. Kent, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. We got another question from Sean, and maybe Carl, you can take this, and if you have anything to add. And he's asking, is there an EMR solution, I'm guessing he means cloud-based, that you know of that allows you to own the .db and the data?
The one I have found is a specific one from one of our practices that does urology, that does allow us to have a copy of the actual MDB file, and they use Microsoft SQL. And this vendor is very forthright about letting on-site IT have access to that data if necessary. They want to keep me out of it as much as possible for their own protection, but if it comes down to we're switching to a different EMR or something happens and I need to be able to pull a record for a particular patient that's at the hospital and for some reason we don't have access in the normal route, I would be able to get in and pull those tables that are necessary. But only one. We have 4 different specialties within our offices. and only that one has given me that kind of guarantee that I'd be able to get to the data if it's in a public cloud situation.
Mm-hmm.
So because Carl's in healthcare and this is so important, right? He's thinking through the things that everybody should be thinking through about what type of data do I put on cloud? What if I put it there? What if I had to get access to it? How do I do that? Who else can access it if it's on that type of a cloud? Am I protected against, the NSA or whoever that might go and look at that? And those are the types of questions that really need to be asked. It's not just cost and ease, but data is very important in understanding it, how it's backed up, how it's protected, how I can access it, who else can access it. Those are all very important points.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Well, now one of the last things that I did want to cover, kind of as key to the whole cloud strategy, is we like to think of this as a great way to help prevent against the challenges around shadow IT. Now, Carl, you had mentioned that you just had aggregated 6 different doctors' hospitals together. That's 6 different user bases that you're now having to oversee. Was shadow IT something that you had to deal with? Did you guys find a lot of kind of rogue applications that people were purchasing kind of as part of the consolidation of offices?
Tons. There is a lot of license agreements that were being used improperly, or a lot of software that was used against what the license agreements had been at one particular office. It's the one that we've had issues with not using a domain either. They would just install whatever they felt they needed. In this particular case, it was a way of marking up images, and they ended up buying a piece of software from a university a few years back, and only one person at that office knew how to use it and pull the images necessary for the doctors. And when that user ultimately quit, around the time I took over, no one knew how to use that software. There's a fair amount of that kind of issue. In my other offices, the ones that I have a little bit better standardization at, I use Spiceworks Network Monitor and Spiceworks other tools to keep tabs on what's going on those networks, and I get to see what software is installed. And I usually don't have too big of a problem. There's a couple of users that have tried to use Dropbox, which is a big no-no. There's a handful of users that have tried to use flash drives that don't have permission to do that. And usually when I bring it up with that particular user, so I was just trying to get a really big file over to this person, and I just had to show them how to use a network share or do something like that. But yeah, shadow IT is something that does come up quite a bit with the diverse user base that I've got. And some of the worst is when doctors think that they have the best answer for IT, and sometimes usually it's not the case.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I was actually at a CIO conference, the CIOs of healthcare organizations, and there's 20 of very large organizations, and they were talking about healthcare, generally speaking, has a smaller shadow IT problem than other organizations because they're so fearful of the negative implications. But then when you said, well, how many doctors took away information on an unprotected iPad or a Dropbox account and shared it, every single one of them said, of course that's going on. Outside of healthcare, shadow IT is rampant because, in general, we're talking about a thoughtful approach to getting people the right application for the right needs, and most IT organizations aren't forthright and aggressively doing that. And so the groups, as in Carl's office, said, well, we'll take things into our own hands, and they don't know any better, and they will make mistakes, and they will have the wrong license agreement, they will have the wrong compliance policy, they will have all kinds of things that are not good for the organization. But if Carl doesn't go and help them get what they need, they may just take things into their own hands, and that is rampant throughout the industry, not only in healthcare, but even places where you'd say it'll never happen. In federal, in other places, almost nobody says that I'm not having shadow IT anymore.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, great. I mean, so I think we've had a great conversation here, and I think, obviously the importance of having that cloud strategy is great. Being able to work with either working independently like Carl or working with an organization that can help you out like Datalink. But Kent, for those of the folks that are watching today that want to get started, thinking about their cloud strategy, what are the questions that they should be asking themselves in their organization?
Well, I'll start with, I think you should do it for the reasons we just articulated, that 5 years ago, everybody in Carl's organization had to go to Carl to get anything. Now they're finding they have choices, and so this is happening, and it's probably not good for the organization. We probably want to determine, what is my motivation? Am I doing this because, the CEO or CIO thinks that IT is too expensive and I want to run things in a less costly fashion, because that appears to be on the surface what cloud is. Do I want to bring my applications to market more quickly, which is probably a huge driving way that shadow IT is happening in many, many organizations, because those apps are driving revenue, and getting that out faster makes me more viable, more profitable, gets me into more markets. And so that's just the agility, and they may not even care what that costs. Or as Carl started saying, I can be much more efficient. So starting to understand those things, understanding what your investments are, because again, Carl started to articulate earlier, I've already virtualized. So I'm partway there. I've done some of the things that are there, understanding, what investments you want to keep. And I would definitely say, work with somebody who's done it, because those, there's plenty, everybody's doing something. And if you work with somebody who's got experience in doing this, maybe we don't have to make the same mistakes again. And so find somebody that's a trusted advisor and consultant to help you work through that.
All right, very cool. Well, we're about at the end of the interview, and I wanted to give you guys one last opportunity to kind of share your final thoughts with the crowd. Carl, let's start with you. If you have any final pieces of advice for folks that are watching today on how to start incorporating the cloud and start thinking about including the cloud in their environment, what would that advice be?
Virtualization is my favorite thing. I love virtualization. I run virtual machines on pretty much every piece of hardware I've got. And getting familiar with virtualization is a great first step to getting ready for the cloud, because a lot of the providers are going to be able to utilize those virtual machine images. Personally, I'm a big fan of VMware because of the high availability, and they've got a few more years working on some of the more advanced needs. Unfortunately, because of the way that my offices were combined, there was no big initial budget for me to use VMware, so Hyper-V was the solution that I was basically allowed to use. And Microsoft does have some good solutions now, and they're getting better. And I think I'm getting much closer to being able to be ready to move to, say, a public cloud as soon as some of the policies and procedures are in place. But so that's advice number one, is learn your virtualization. It helps a lot. And number two is, any good IT person, know your customers and clients. Having to work with the high-level neurosurgeons at one of my offices, as well as the line-level employees, being able to understand what their job duties are and what they actually do day to day, and not in a strictly IT sense. You have to understand what this particular receptionist has to do every day to make sure that patients are seen efficiently, and knowing how your systems, your IT systems, interact with them. It's not just a one-way street. So understand your user base is advice number two. Number three, try to have fun. I mean, it's I have a lot on my plate, but I do have a lot of fun. I like going out and seeing my users and joking around with them, and they know a lot about me, and they like to joke around with what's going on with my life or what's going on in the office.
So don't be that IT curmudgeon that people
always no Nick Burns.
Kent, same question to you. What final takeaways do you want the folks that are watching today to walk away with?
Well, great answers from Carl. I would say number one, for somebody who's in IT, you need to do something. Just do it. Start to think about your strategy. Start to figure out, what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to slow down shadow IT, if you're trying to provide, agility and innovation for the organization, figure out what you're doing, but do something, because otherwise other pieces in the organization are going to move forward without you. Even if the answer is no. I mean, go through and do the calculations. And, you know, a few years ago, a lot of people did this where they said, oh, we've done the calculation, and the answer is nobody else can do this better. Even if that's the answer, at least you've got the data behind it, and you've shown that you understand the problem. And I think Carl's last point is incredibly important. Understand your customer, because there's been many people that sat with all walls of IT, built some sort of a private cloud, and everybody looked at it and said, that's cool. Doesn't apply to anything I do, but sure, that's cool. So, you know, it's important for the organization to understand, well, you know, these guys are building a call center, these guys are building applications. What helps them make money? What helps them get their job done? And how can I help that? And have that communication in as much as possible in their language, as opposed to what technology I can give you. That's incredibly important. I think a very important point to make it successful. Deliver services that help them accomplish something great will make your cloud strategy successful.
All right, great. And Matt, final thoughts from you. What do you want folks to walk away with as far as Cisco One?
Sure, I would just say, you know, as you're looking and dealing with all the complexity of procuring these solutions and deploying them, I think Cisco One is an excellent way to remove some of those obstacles, I guess, in terms of trying to find the right solution, get the right tools, get them all deployed. So if you do find yourself going down this path of data center virtualization, automation, et cetera, or even just standard network refreshes, and you're trying to bring them up to a more modern standard with things like policy management, et cetera, Cisco One can be an excellent tool to both save money and also deliver the most complete solution that you possibly can. Ask your Cisco rep about it, ask your partners such as Datalink for help with that, because it is something that can be very beneficial at the end of the day for you.
All right, you guys heard it here first. Well, it is about that time to announce who our winner is. The winner of the Wii U is going to be going to, drumroll please, Craig Spizzeri. Craig Spizzeri, also known as C-Spiz in the community. Hopefully that if that's your rapper name, we'd love to hear your mixtape sometime. So congratulations, Craig, and send me a private message in the community and let us know what address you'd like us to ship it to. And I wanted to thank all of our panelists one last time. Carl, Kent, and Matt, really enjoyed today's sessions. I think it was really helpful for a lot of folks in the audience today. Thanks to everyone for asking those great questions. So make sure that you check back and see what other online events we've got coming up for you guys. We have a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe, so be sure to check it out. But until next time, guys, stay safe and keep it spicy, and we'll see you guys back here next time. Goodbye, everyone.